Okay, let's wrap this module up by way of an overview. So, in this module, the first thing that we covered was the concept associated with MAC addresses. We mentioned what they were, we mentioned how they were configured, how they operated, and actually what comprised a MAC address. We discussed them as being physical or burned-in addresses that we use to be able to represent endpoints in a unique fashion at layer 2, which means, again, we're operating at the data link layer of the OSI model. The next thing that we discussed was going to be the idea of the content addressable memory table, or the MAC address table, sometimes called the CAM table, of a switch and how that represents the intelligence of the device that we were talking about. Lastly, we looked at the way handle the concept of whether a switch would flood a frame, whether a switch would forward a frame, or whether a switch will filter a frame. And these are vitally important concepts. I know people who are studying for CCIE level certification that have difficulty governing and discussing how each of these different components work, function, and operate. And they fail to look at them. These are things that a lot of times that are so basic, we take advantage of them, or at least we take the fact that they exist as basically just something that we forget about. We just lose track of this functionality, especially in a lot of deployments where we're starting to work with things like layer 3 solutions, where the layer 3 solutions are going to involve routing. But keep in mind, even in the CCNA, it is called routing and switching. And that's what we're focused on right now. In this module, we're focused predominantly on layer 2 switching, which means I need to start adding some additional topics. First of all, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about basic configuration. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into the concept of the physical topology versus a logical topology. And that's going to definitely be an issue when we start looking at the fact that I could have a host connected physically to a switch, SW1, let's just say host 1, and then switch 1 could be connected to switch 2. As long as these two devices are operating inside of the same layer 2 domain, we should be perfectly fine. However, I could also have another host connected to here, host 2. Now the thing that we need to look at, this is what is referred to as the physical drawing. But from a logical perspective, since we operate in Ethernet using a technology called transparent bridging, the hosts actually think that they are connected like so. They think that they're logically connected one to another. In fact, they can even be configured to where we're going to have more than 2 devices. This is defining what Ethernet constitutes. Later on in your studies, you'll actually hear the concept of a MACD. That's going to be a multi-access collision domain. Now, a multi-access collision domain is going to be basically the veritable definition of Ethernet. So with that being said, let's move on, and we've just finished this lesson, and it was a pretty big one when you really think about it, especially if a lot of these concepts are new. So we're going to take what we learned in the previous lesson, and we're going to move forward, and we're going to start talking about this idea of basic configuration. We're going to move into a conversation about physical and logical configuration, and then what I want to do is I want to take a look at some of the layer 2 protocols that we need to know to satisfy the testing criteria that Cisco set out in the DCICN exam. Specifically, we're going to talk about LLDP, Link Layer Discovery Protocol, Cisco Discovery Protocol, and we're also going to be talking later on about some other topics that are going to fall in this category when it comes to learning VLANs and things like that dynamically. But again, this is just a review. So to date, we have covered the MAC address tables and MAC addresses themselves, CAM tables, and we've covered flooding, forwarding, and filtering functionality in this lesson. I'm Terry Vinson, and I hope that this was helpful, and I want to thank you for learning Data Center with me. I'll see you in the next lesson.